Hey, Tom, there's my son, Jeff. Woohoo, we're going to have some fun. Okay. Now, as you can see, I have given myself the screen name of Esteban de San Diego. And I need something better. So if you have a better Old West name that is appropriate for a family show that you would like to suggest, I'd be glad to take a look at it, because as I was telling Frank, the only Old West bad guy that I could find whose name was Steve was Dirty Steve. Well, I don't want to do that. I mean, there's really cool names like, Buckskin Frank Leslie and Snake Eyes Jones and all that kind of stuff. And since, Steve just doesn't sound like that kind of a threatening name, I thought, well, I'll use my middle name, Dana. Well, that's not a threatening name. Deadeye Dana. That just doesn't work, whatever. But anyway, if you have a suggestion appropriate for a family show that would be a good Old West name for me, I can change that from Esteban de San Diego, because I'm from San Diego, and so are my friends Dallas and Marna from San Diego. My son Jeff lived in San Diego, so maybe it should be the San Diego gang. Who knows? Okay, let's talk about the Dalton gang by the numbers, and the numbers that encompassed their crime spree were 1890 to 1892. And this is essentially how robbing banks and robbing trains didn't add up. Now, you might be thinking, why are we talking about the Dalton gang? They were like back east and all that sort of a thing. Yeah, they did do a lot of their depredations back east, but as you will see, there's a Central California link, a big one, connected with the Dalton gang. Now I push the button and it should go to the next screen. Click. No, it's not clicking. Try that one. There we go. So first of all, if we're going to do it by the numbers, and you've seen that kind of an approach to the news, how many votes or how many this, how many that. So let's look at the Dalton gang by the numbers. Let's do the math. And here's the interesting math. 1 plus 3 equals 10. Okay, you got that? That'll be on the final test. One town, Benton, Missouri, generated 3 very famous Old West gangs. They were the Dalton brothers and their cousins, the younger brothers, and their neighbors, the James brothers. So you got Grant Dalton, Bill Dalton, Bob Dalton, Emmett Dalton, Tom, John, Jim Bob, who were the Dalton's cousins, the younger brothers, and then, of course, the James brothers, Frank and Jesse James. They all came out of the same town, and they were related to each other, or they were neighbors. And it makes me wonder, what was in the water? I mean, how did that come about, that those guys, all from the same town, all turned out to be such bad guys? Now, take a look at this. Not all of the Daltons were bad. Not all of them were bank robbers. Not all of them were train robbers. But as you can see from my nifty little chart here, we don't remember the good ones. Now, the family. And I should point out, too, that some of the information that I've seen about the Dalton crew said there were 15 children. Another one said there were 12. Some say 14, so there were several. We don't remember the good ones. Charles Benjamin, Ben Dalton, he lived until 1936. Cole Dalton, Littleton, or Lit Dalton, and he has local Clovis roots and information. We'll talk about that in a bit. Frank Dalton, he was a good one, a lawman. As you can see, he didn't live all that long. 1887, we'll come back to that. And then there were a couple of the bad ones, Grant Dalton, Bill Dalton, who became, can you believe this, the leader of the Wild Bunch. That's right, Butch Cassidy, Sundance Kid, all that stuff. a hole in the wall gang and all. It's just, that's all tied together. Then there was, of course, Eva Mae Dalton. Then there was Bob Dalton. You can see that there's two that have the same termination date, 1892. That'll be Grat and Bob, and that we'll get to that town where they cashed in their chips in Coffeyville, Kansas. Emmett Dalton lived till 1937, and then another sister. This just blows my mind. Leona Randolph Dalton. She lived until 1964. That was just 2 years before I got out of high school. So they're like, hey, Dallas, when you got out of high school, she had just died. She just passed away. I mean, it's not like this is all ancient history. Then there was Nancy Mae and Simon Noel Cy Dalton. And then there were two children who died in infancy. So that may contribute to the discrepancies as to how many Dalton spawn there were. All righty. So here's another by the numbers thing. 14 minus 2 minus 3 minus 4 equals 5. There were 14, like I say, 14 or 15 kids. 2 died in infancy, 3 were girls. 4 went on down the outlaw trail. 5 were outstanding citizens, Ben, Cole, Lip, Frank, and Simon. And the only one that's left out in that discussion is Frank. Oops, slow down, computer. 5 minus 1 equals tragedy. Again, Frank Dalton, 1859 to 1887, he was the good one. He was a U.S. Deputy Marshal in Indian Territory, and he was killed trying to arrest moonshiners, because moonshiners were the plague of the, what was the name of the Indian nation that was on that particular, the Osage Nation. The moonshine, the firewater was decimating the Osage Nation. And Frank's job was to enforce the law in Indian Territory, which is today's Oklahoma. And in the process of trying to arrest a couple of moonshiners, he got killed. Obviously, though, prior to being killed, he deputized several of his brothers, and they decided that stealing livestock was more profitable than what the government was paying deputy marshals. Now, thanks to Bob Bose Bell of Arizona type Old West magazine stuff, deputy marshals earned $200 annually, $2 for serving legal papers, $4 for an arrest, and if they had to travel to make an arrest, they got 5 cents per mile. And they could supplement their income by collecting taxes. So you can see that it wasn't a real lucrative profession. So because of that, the other 4 boys that we'll talk about here in just a second decided stealing livestock and driving it off somewhere else was much more profitable. Now, here's a crazy story. One brother, Bill, minus one cousin equaled one dead handsome stranger. Now, in a contemporary biography of these guys, there's this elaborate story of Bill falling for his cousin. I mean, this was, the way it was back in them days. And his love for her was unrequited. She instead ran off with a handsome stranger named Charles Montgomery. Well, Charlie ended up dead under suspicious circumstances, and the boys were off and running. So some contemporary storytellers blamed it all on Bill, but that's one of those details that it's kind of hard to nail down. The point is, they all ended up, these 4 guys ended up on the outlaw trail. Bob, Grat, Emmett, and Bill. Emmett is the only one. Well, we'll talk about Emmett in a couple minutes because it's just an absolutely crazy, crazy story. Grant Dalton is the one that has the most clear connection to the Sierra Nevada mountains. We'll come to that in just a couple of minutes. And oops, there we go. Hold still. Bill Dalton kind of went sort of good, kind of sort of, until he got hooked up with the Hole of the Wall gang. Bill Dalton had a ranch over in the Paso Robles area, and often the law would try to track the Daltons to that ranch, and it's just this long, convoluted, crazy story. One of the stories talks about a couple of the boys hiding in the crawl space above the house because the law was there to get them. The law had come and said, hey, can we stay here for dinner and will you feed us? And the family that they were with said, oh, sure. And well, these guys were hiding up in the crawl space and they had to be still and not make any noise for like 13 or 14 hours until the lawman actually left. It's just mind-boggling, the stories. Now, one of the reasons, now why did they go bad? Why did they go bad? This is a crazy thing. Hey, Tom, you'll appreciate this. I went with the Harley Owners Group up to a lake recently, last few weeks ago, Manzanita Lake, and one of the members of the chapter, Tom and I are both members of the Harley Owners Group here, one of the members of the chapter, I think it was Buckshot, said, oh yeah, my grandpa knew them boys. And he said that the reason they decided to go bad was because there was nothing else to do. And for some excitement, they decided to rob some trains. I don't know if that's true or not, but he said that was the story. Now, let's come back to the Daltons and not necessarily trying to figure out what story is which. Biggest problem with talking about the Daltons is just picking which story to tell. Now, as you probably know, the vast majority of all of the focus on the Dalton gang is when they decided to rob two banks in the town of Coffeyville, and it didn't turn out so well for them. But there's more stories about them than just that, how they met their demise. But let's overview a few more things and see if we can't figure out how they got that way. Before we get to that one story about one mountain and one Dalton that got away, let's overview a few others. Now, as I said, there were 10 boys. There was a ne'er-do-well father, and that equals our story. The dad, James Lewis Dalton, was a veteran of the Mexican-American War. He lived for a while, the whole family lived for a while in Coffeyville, Kansas, so they were really well known. But he seemingly spent all of his money on fast horses, booze, and fast women. And if you look at his life and how many little Daltons there were running around, apparently he only came home long enough to beget another child. And then he was off again, chasing race horses and trying to do all sorts of crazy stuff like that. So these younger boys, not the younger as in Cole Younger, but the younger members of the Dalton clan really didn't have a good role model or a dad to whoop them up alongside of the head, and they ended up going down the outlaw trail. Mason, or as I mentioned, his nickname, most common name was Bill, had a ranch in Paso Robles. He had a wife, but he too might have been on the fringe of outlawry. Who knows? Not know for sure. So you got them boys. So the four boys decided to rob a train. Now, their first train robbery was in Alila, which is now Early Mart here in the Central Valley. February 6, 1891, that will still be on the final test. Loot, 0, dead, 1 train man, 1 Dalton plus 1 bad boy equaled nothing. Remember from our last time together, when I talked about bad boys of the Central Sierra, Chris Evans and John Sontag, they were probably, or at least Chris Evans was probably part of that train robbery crew. And he was connected with the Daltons, we will see rather quite a bit. Now, the train man who was killed was the fireman. He walked back to the coach that had all the money and everything in it, the luggage car, and they're banging on the door. He's let me in, let us in. And G.S. Radcliffe was the fireman. He was killed accidentally by a ricocheted bullet from the guard who was inside that car, that train car, a guy named Haswell. Now, everybody thought, because there was some shooting going on, that the youngest Dalton, Emmett, was the one who was responsible for the death of the fireman, G.S. Radcliffe. But forensics, being what they were in those days, they were able to determine that he had not fired that shot, but rather that what killed the fireman was a ricocheted shot from the guard inside of the baggage car. So they wanted to try Emmett, Grat, all those guys for murder, but then the forensic of that day were able to pull out the bullet from the dead guy and realized, oh, this didn't come from the gun that Emmett Dalton had. It actually had come from the train guard. So when the legal wranglings got going on, the legal officers, the law officers said, well, you know what? We know that Emmett didn't pull the trigger that killed the fireman. Well, will you swear to that in court? Yeah. And then when it came time to do that, guess what? They didn't swear to it in court. So there was murder charges were being sought. So now here's where Littleton comes in. Littleton Dalton worked for Clovis Coal here in the town of Clovis. And the night of that train robbery, he's in a bar. He's in a bar, and in comes Grat. And word had already gotten back that, oh, there's a train robbery. Well, then Grat comes walking in, and the good brother, Littleton, calls attention to the fact, hey, here's my brother, look what time it is. And it was obvious to everybody that was around, there wasn't enough time for him to have robbed a train and ridden his horse back and show up in Clovis. And so he provided him an alibi. However, it became clear later that he actually didn't have a horse. He rode the train, another train back to Fresno. So he was very much in on that attempted train robbery in which the fireman was killed. And most likely Chris Evans of the Bad Boys at Central Sierra was in on that too. So Grat gets convicted. Grat gets convicted of the train robbery and the murder, and he's going to be, sent up the river or across the bay to San Quentin or whatever. But somehow he gets out of the Visalia jail. And how did he get out of the Visalia jail? Well, it would appear from all of the evidence that Chris Evans, Bad Boy of the Central Sierra, slipped him a hacksaw blade, because they later found a hacksaw blade in the toilet in the jail cell. And whenever he was cutting the bars, one of the other inmates would grab his guitar and he'd be playing his guitar and singing and making enough noise to cover up the sound of the hacksaw. So he was able to cut the bar out, and apparently he actually went in and out of the jail a couple of times. And then years later, one of the key law men said that the horse that he got away on, that Grant Dalton got away on, belonged to Chris Evans' mother-in-law. So there's another tie-in with those bad boys of the Central Sierra. And he provided him with a horse to get away. He provided him with a Winchester, with ammunition. It's just stupefying. Now, there's another crazy contemporary story that says the way he got away was not by crawling out of the jail cell, but as he is being transported by train to San Quentin, where he was going to be put in jail for quite a few years, that two guards, one of them would, another part of the train have a smoke or something, and the other one dozed off, and he's handcuffed to him, but somehow he slipped the handcuffs and dove out the window of the moving train somewhere between Fresno and Berenda Slough, and he ended up down into the river, and he got away. Seems a little improbable, especially since you have a lawman like Gene Kay, who was the one of the principal detectives, who said that now Chris Evans sprung it out by allowing him to have a saw blade and cutting the window open, cutting this jail cell window open. Okay, back to the numbers. One good brother, one bad brother, an alibi, 5 lawmen, a compromised lawyer. Well, that's the other thing. The lawyer who was going to represent Dalton was also a consulting lawyer for the Southern Pacific. So he didn't have a real big interest in seeing that he got off. Now, and from then on, it was the hits just kept on coming. 2 + 2 = boom. As you can see, some of the cars on trains, when they were attacked by malfeasance guys, they would use sticks of dynamite to blow the darn thing open. Well, there was another attempted train robbery up by Ceres. And again, even though the train car itself got blown open, no loot and 1 injured lawman. Now, everybody assumed that the Dalton boys did it. It's just them Dalton boys. Get them Dalton boys. And there wasn't any evidence, though, that Bill Dalton or his buddy, Dean Riley, had done it. They were arrested, but released for lack of evidence. And they probably didn't do it. That was probably completely the work of Chris Evans and John Sontag. So here we're going to go back to recap a little bit, but needed to come back to this because of the connection to Dalton Mountain. 1 saw blade plus 1 friend = 1 jailbreak. Grat did make an escape to the Sierra foothills, and then he threatened to kill an acquaintance of a buddy if the buddy wouldn't bring him food and supplies to, drum roll please, Dalton Mountain. Now, when I first saw the monument, the marker for Dalton Mountain at Wonder Valley, I wondered about it. I took a look at this monument and thought, a posse, a shootout with the infamous Dalton gang here in California? So I was totally surprised, but it's a true story. Now there's the monument that's out there placed by the clampers. But notice it says in 1891, a posse shootout forced the infamous Dalton Brothers gang. Well, apparently there was only one Dalton brother and his buddy, Dean Riley. Dean Riley was captured, but there was a dog. And the dog who was with Dean Riley and Grat Dalton, when they were closing in on Grat, the dog started to bark. And Grat heard that, the shots were exchanged, and Grat made his getaway good. He said he dived into the bushes and ran down the mountain. So the Dalton brother got away, but the other fellow who was with him was captured. And when he runs down the mountain, he confronts Judson Elwood. Does that name sound familiar? What's the name of the road that runs through Wonder Valley? Elwood. Well, Judson Elwood had a ranch or whatever down there, and he's plowing. He's plowing with his horses, and suddenly this fellow, they hear shots up in the mountains, and this guy suddenly shows up, forces him to give him one of the horses, and he makes his getaway, linked back up with his brothers, and they made their escape through Tehachapi Pass. Fortunately, they didn't get hit by any one of those big windmills. Well, there weren't any windmills then, but they made their lucky break and got out of the Sierra area. And as you likely know, Tehachapi Pass, which is just east of beautiful Bakersfield, is the official southern end of the Sierra Nevada mountains. And south of that pass, it's the Tehachapis, and north of that, it's the Sierras all the way up into Oregon. Well, so then these fellas, the brothers, trekked 75 miles across the Mojave Desert, the Mojave Desert. 75 miles plus one equals one lucky break. 75 miles trekking across the desert, one water stop, but they made it. So I don't know from my reading and stuff whether they were on foot or horseback, but they did survive the trek across the Mojave Desert with one water stop. They got back home to Mama in the Oklahoma Territory, and then they thought, well, instead of just sitting around, nothing on television, let's go rob some more trains. So they robbed some more trains, and they were successful. And the law was starting to zero in on them. And Grat, even though he was one of the boys who was younger than some of the others, came up with a great idea. Now, remember, these boys, the Daltons, were cousins of the Youngers. And what happened to the Youngers? The Youngers decided back in 1876, so like 12 years or so before they were doing their thing, to rob one bank in Northfield, Minnesota. And as you probably know, if you've studied any history at all, that didn't go so well for them. They kind of got all shot to pieces. And the only ones who escaped were Frank and Jesse James. And then they went on to form new gangs. And the hits just kept on coming. But nevertheless, Grat thought, well, our cousins decided to rob one bank in broad daylight. Boys, why don't we rob two banks in broad daylight? Yeah, let's do it. So that's what they decided to do. One audacious plan plus one angry town equaled 4 dead outlaws and 4 good citizens. So they decided to rob the Condom Bank and the National Bank, it was called. As you can see, Bob got the chalk outline where he fell. Dead outlaws were Bob and Grat and Tom Evans, who was the brother of Chris Evans. Remember Chris, Tom, these guys are all linked together. And Dick Broadwell. Now here's a crazy thing you'll see in just a moment. Those are the 4 dead outlaws. Who were the 4 dead citizens? Well, Charles Brown, George Cuban, Lucius Baldwin, and Charles Connolly, who was the town marshal. Now, the heroes who fought to stop them got a stone marker, and the outlaws got a museum. Why are we fascinated with the outlaws, the bad guys? I mean, our country has enough of a gun culture as it is, but fascination with murder and mayhem, yep, that's what happens. So they got all shot up. They did get some money out of the bank, but they didn't get far with it. Now take a look at this. If you've ever seen any Old West pictures, you're probably familiar with this one. One, photography tells it all, mostly all. This post-mortem picture, in some ways, is worth 1,000 words and several stories. First of all, obviously, there's 4 dead outlaws it says Tim Evans, but it was actually Tom, Bob Dalton, Grant Dalton, and Dick Broadwell. Oh, notice how Bob Dalton's pant legs don't come all the way down to his shoes. That was because, according to contemporary reports, people, when they came to see the dead outlaws, they wanted a souvenir. So they started picking little bits of this and that off of the dead guys. So they had something to remember that day by. So there's the 4 dead outlaws. And then in the upper left-hand corner, there's a picture of Emmett. We'll come back to him in a second. And look at about the 11 o'clock position of that picture. What do you see? I remember first time I looked at that, I go, who's that little kid looking through the fence? I was astounded. What's the deal with the little boy looking through the fence? Now, I thought, wouldn't that be something if he turned out to be, I don't know, Dwight Eisenhower or some famous World War I hero, you know, like, well, anyway, but just a boy named Ray Clark. At the time of this picture, he was 13. He died in 1949, the year after I was born. And he registered for service during World War I. He worked as a shipwright for years, and he worked as in a hardware store. So just a kid. But it's just astounding to me when I looked at this picture. I go, who in the world is that little kid peeking through the fence? And again, thank you to Bob Bose Bell. I can't say that fast. I have to say it very carefully. Bob Bose Bell. On Easter Sunday morning, I sent him an email and I said, hey, Bob, who's that little kid? And within 2 hours, he answered me and he got me the information from the Coffeyville Museum about who this kid was. Now, the picture was taken by, what was that fellow's name? John Tackett. Remember that name because we're going to come back to it. John Tackett. And he and Emmett eventually started up a connection that we'll get to in a minute. Now, ignominious ending to the boys. They dug one hole, threw all 4 of the bad guys in it. Bob Dalton, Grant Dalton, Bill Powers, and Dick Broadwell didn't even get an honorable mention. He's in the hole too. And initially there was no grave marker. And one of the townspeople just stuck a piece of scrap pipe in the ground and said, oh, those guys were just scrap anyway. Well, the appropriate marker was finally placed in 1931 by Emmett after he got out of prison. That marker was stolen and then replaced. And guess what people come to see now when they go to Coffeyville? Do they go to see the marker for the 4 citizens who were killed and the police officer who was killed? No, they just want to see the Dalton headstones and the museum for the Daltons. Now, again, thank you to Bob Bose Bell. The reason they got shot up so badly in Coffeyville was because of 4 fatal mistakes. First of all, they were wearing fake beards, bad disguises. And remember, these were boys that lived in that town, had been away for several years, and they thought, well, if we show up and put on these fake beards, nobody will know who we are. Well, they knew who the Daltons were the moment they set foot in town on their horses. And even back then, there was a paving project going on in Coffeyville. And so the horse hitching post they had planned to hitch their horses to was no longer there. They had to go around in the back to an alley. And then the boys split up. 3 went to one bank, 2 went to the other bank, and Grant went into the one bank and he said, give us your money, open the safe. And the teller said, well, I can't open it till after 9:30. Well, the clock on the wall said 9:40, but Grant didn't see that. And they just hung around for several minutes saying, well, I guess I can wait. Then we'll get your money. Well, and unfortunately, because it had already been recognized, right next to the other bank, there was a place called Isham's Hardware. And somebody alerted the people in Isham's Hardware. He started handing out guns and ammo. So as soon as they came out of the bank, they got hurt. You might say, yeah, they got blasted. So one outlaw plus 23 bullets equals 17 plus 2 plus 1. So what in the world is that? Well, all 4 of those guys that you saw the pictures of who are dead were shot up pretty bad, pretty quickly. But rather than flee after the shooting started, it was like about a 10-minute period of time. Bob fell, and Emmett stopped to help him. Emmett got, put your seatbelts on for this, 23 bullet wounds, but somehow he survived. After he was able to stand trial, he was sentenced to life in prison, but the good governor of Kansas pardoned him after 14 years. He went straight, moved to Southern California in 1907. He wrote a book, he wrote 2 books, Beyond the Law and When the Daltons Rode, and it was co-written with a gentleman, Los Angeles journalist, and it was adapted into a 1940 movie. There was another movie that it made in 1919, and it was a movie that Emmett made in conjunction with the fellow who had taken the picture of the 4 dead outlaws, Mr. Tackett. So he had opened a movie theater. They bought a really expensive movie camera in the like 19 teens, and they made this movie. Emmett played himself, but they didn't really have the ability to pull together a good story. It was just a bunch of writing and shooting, and it didn't, develop the characters or any such thing. So the movie was a bust. But nevertheless, 23 bullets, 17 or 14 years in prison, rather, 2 books and 1 movie. And then, go back to this for just a second. After he had done all of that, he moved to the Los Angeles area, married a gal, and eventually became a speaker. He apparently got religion, as they say, and he spent a lot of time trying to convince young people, don't go down the outlaw trail. And he didn't want the bad guys in the whole outlaw group to be glamorized so that everybody thought, oh, what a way to live. Yeah, well, they all died in their 20s if they were lucky to live that long. And then he eventually ended up selling real estate. So they were back to a life of crime, maybe. Just kidding. So, one remaining question, though. I have one remaining question. Why are we fascinated by murder in general and Old West outlaws in particular? Why? Why is this? Aaron McCarthy, who is an award-winning journalist, said, well, because we have an obsession with true crime, and that's just normal. Who doesn't look? And because evil fascinates us, she says. Another reason she said was because of the 24-hour news cycle. And she also stated, who can look away from a train wreck? We all want a rubberneck. You're going down the road, you see a car with a flat tire, well off to the side, everybody slows down and has to look. Also because it gives us a sense that if we know what's happened, that maybe we'll be prepared and maybe we'll survive. And I'm glad I'm not the victim or the perpetrator. And we love to see mysteries solved in a 30-minute show. And we like to get scared, but not too scared. And who doesn't love a good story? So that's it for the Dalton gang. But here's what I hope. First of all, I appreciate very much that you've come along for this. And I hope that you've enjoyed this trip back to the Old West, that you learned a little bit about our local history. Yes, exciting things have happened here too. I hope that you've gained a little insight into our shared human nature, about our fascination with evil. And I hope that you'll resolve to get back to your neighborhoods and times without having to ride the outlaw trail and get shot 23 times and spend 14 years in jail. Skip all that stuff and just start giving back. And but on the other hand, if you want to write 2 books and produce a movie in which you are the star, knock yourself out. Thank you very much. You've been a wonderful audience. Oh, we got a couple of questions here.
Yeah, thanks so much, Steve. Great job. Just, do we have any idea where Gratz Ranch was in Paso Robles? And is there any chance that there's a winery on top of it right now?
Yeah, probably so. I could look it up, but it was in Paso. I don't know exactly where.
Okay, just interesting. And one other note for people to, one other thing for people to take note of is that if you can just go to Google Maps and type in Dalton Mountain, California, and it'll show right up. It says it's in Sanger, which is very close to us here. So it's just, it's fascinating to see names like the Daltons that are often mentioned in the same breath with Billy the Kid and Jesse James and Butch Cassidy and the Daltons, and they were just a few miles from here too. So thank you so much for bringing that to us today. And I don't see any other questions, so we look forward to your next presentation, Steve. Great job, and it's going to be in person here at the museum. So have your autograph book handy, and that will be on June 12th. And also remember, everybody, June 18th is our fundraising dinner, so please buy your tickets there. You can go to museumofthesierra.org and click on the banner and buy tickets. So thank you so much, everyone. Thanks for coming, and we look forward to seeing you next time.